Brian the Ride Mechanic here. Trying out a new microphone setup. Hopefully this works better. But I like to hear the voice feedback. It's really nice because before I really couldn't know what I was getting audio-wise until I recorded the entire thing and went back and checked. And sometimes the videos didn't have any audio to them. Faux pas on my part. Whatever. Anyways, I want to do some more viewer questions that I had. This one comes in by subscriber Hi. They ask, with everything going on the El Toro, been wondering how hard it is to maintain a wooden roller coaster. That's question one. Number two, who is the best manufacturer in terms of overall product? I didn't understand in this if they were talking about a wooden roller coaster manufacturer or just in general, so I'm going to answer the question my point of view in general. Number three, how do you find out about new attractions, and what do you have to say on what's added? Number four, is the intamin trauma, as they like to call it, a real thing, and why do intamins go down a lot? So, four good questions. I'd like to give you my opinion. That's all it is just opinion, because that's just it. Nothing's fact. First of all, wooden roller coasters, how hard are they to maintain? They're extremely hard to maintain. The phrase, I'm sure you probably heard it before, wooden roller coasters are living, breathing creatures. And that's actually true. So wood is part of a living surface. It's part of a tree. It was living. So it reacts to the environment it's in. It reacts to moisture, water, and all sorts of other things. So the quickest way to destroy a wooden roller coaster is to let it dry out. Parks go to a lot of extent to put sprinklers all over the track and make sure it's nice and wet all the time. So the wood swells up, because when the wood dries out, it shrinks down. And then all the bolted connections, or the screwed connections, start to loosen. And that doesn't just make for a rickety roller coaster, that makes for a lot of G-force and impact taking its toll in areas where it shouldn't. So it's really important to keep the wood swelled up and saturated and nice and wet and cool. That way the trains can run over it, and the boards are also very pliable at that point in time too. They spring back like a rubber band. So the goal on wooden roller coasters is to bend things, because if they don't bend, they break. So you want to make sure that the wood's bendable, and it has to be nice and soft to do that, and typically needs water. The other thing that you get into is, because of the excessive G-force that most roller coasters these days have on them, on that track and structure, you need to retrack during the off-season. That's where you take the laminate stack apart and you have to go through hundreds of feet of ride and replace the entire laminate stack, until eventually, over 6 to 8 years, you've replaced the entire laminate stack around the entire roller coaster. And that is a lot of work. That's a crew of people employed full-time, night and day, 6 hours in the morning time of on the average, it's 4 people inspecting that ride in the morning time, making sure everything's tip-top shape. And then a lot of times during the day, those wooden roller coasters will go down, because operations is watching everything, and no matter how much effort you put into that ride, things will happen, and operations has to stop it in order to keep the thing safe. So it sounds bad. It's really not, but all the time on like a set of bents, you'll see one of the batter boards come undone. And as a train goes by, you'll see that board just sitting there and flopping on the side like that. And pretty much no one's going to notice it. Nothing really happens at that point, but it is cause for concern, so operations will stop the ride, and we have to call out maintenance carpenters out there, and they have to climb the track and get the board secured back down. Because when you start loosening up boards, it's just like dry wood. It takes its toll on the structure a lot quicker than it should. And nobody wants that. So I'm going to move on to question number 2 now, which is best manufacturer in terms of overall product. Overall product, for me, I haven't really experienced all the manufacturers out there. Most mechanics won't. But so far of the stuff I've seen, I really do, just like people riding rides, I really do have to give it to B&M. They are quite literally the top of the class. We call them the Cadillac of roller coasters. They're probably one of the most expensive roller coasters out there, but they're pretty much the best in every category. They're great to work on. They're easy to maintain. They have high throughput through them. They don't break down too much. They offer just a great overall product. There's plenty of manufacturers that make similar rides that are much cheaper out there, but B&M does it much better in my opinion. So I'm very partial to them. Now, mind you, when I grew up in my position working on rides, I actually became a very good Vekoma mechanic. So I grew up on 2 Vekoma rides, a Boomerang and an SLC. So those 2 in particular I have very intimate experience with. So those rides, I like them. They're good. They're dependable. They work good as well. They run good. They require much more maintenance to them. I'm not going to lie about that. But it's a much more achievable product for most parks. So the quality is still good. They're very safe. They're reliable. But they do take more maintenance to keep them running. And they take overall daily more maintenance to maintain a lot of little tiny adjustments all over the equipment. But I do like Vekoma. They're a very good manufacturer. I like their stuff. It seems to be a good product that they offer to the industry. Zamperla, I've dealt with some of their stuff, not too much. So I don't have much to say about them. Mainly their stuff I've dealt with was more kiddie rides, flat rides, more towards the carnival ride aspects. Dealt with a lot of their stuff there. Let's see if dealt with a Gerschlauer spinning coaster. They do a nice product, very heavy duty. You could tell theirs are meant to move, and pretty reliable. The controls I wasn't over the moon about, but seemed to get a lot of cascading block shutdowns on that one, which also could be brought back to how operations decides to run the ride. But that's that. And wooden roller coasters, I'm partial to the Millennium Flyers out there that Great Coaster built. Those are pretty good trains. Great Coasters does a good job with their stuff. And then people say, well, yeah, we had an RMC train. We had an RMC track that was put on where our Millennium Flyer was. But realistically, I put the I put the RMC stuff into the steel coaster category. Because, yeah, it's on a wood structure. Yeah, I'll give you that one. But realistically, they're steel rails with steel support beams to them. And it just rests on top of wood. So if it rides on steel, guides on steel, and the steel holds it together, it's a steel coaster, in my opinion. I know that one's going to cause a lot of issue with a lot of people, but yeah, I think the RMC hybrids are just steel coasters. And RMC's trains are pretty good. They're a little complicated for me. There's a lot of moving components. There's a lot of bushings and a lot of all sorts of other things that go into them, which makes for a good ride and a precise ride. But there is just a ton of upkeep and maintenance to them. But they are pretty good trains. As far as the rest of stuff, for the one that we had in particular, we designed the control system and brakes and everything else for that one. So RMC only did the track and the train for that particular one. Moving on to question number 3. So how do you find out about new attractions, and do you have any say on what's added? So it's kind of 2 parts to that question. How do you find out about new attractions? New attractions, for the most part, from where I am now, I hear about them through just normal channels everybody else does when parks announce things and so on and so forth. When I was working for the park, we would actually be subject to the exact same rumor mill. Most of the time, the park doesn't even fill in the employees on what's coming into the park and what's happening with stuff until it's happening. And even then, it was one of those things, I'm going to believe it when it's in concrete, literally. Because I heard multiple years we were getting something, and we were getting this, we're getting this, and then it didn't happen. So, and they did that over so many years, it was kind of like it's a running joke. It's like, well, we're supposed to get this right. It's like, okay, when they start pouring concrete piers for it, I'll believe it at that point in time. Until then, it's just a rumor. So the parks are very secretive about that. They don't want to tip their hand. That's a lot of money they're putting into. It's a big draw for their season pass holders and everything else. So it's very secretive. And like I said, most of the time, even the employees don't have any say over things. When I got high enough into the chain, I started to get in on some of the design, not quite reviews, but so engineering and the manufacturer get together and they do all the design reviews and specifications and all that stuff. When the ride is 90% designed and engineered, that's when they start giving information to the park at a very high level. So at that level, that's when I've gone into some closed door meetings, and it's like, okay, they lay the plans out on the table. Here's what's going on. Here's the manual for it. Start going through stuff. The manufacturers, when it comes to manuals, they always go above and beyond what's needed. And honestly, the park's job is to kind of wrangle that back to what's doable. So the manufacturer might say something like, we want you to clean and inspect, tear down the restraints on every single vehicle every single day. It's like, well, that's great, but that'll take a crew of 25 guys working 2 days straight to get that train ready for 1 day. Not feasible. So we have to push back and say, well, we can't do that. We need to do some alternate inspection. We need to do something else. And there's a lot of very careful communication between manufacturers, engineers, insurance companies, all that stuff, to make sure that the end inspection is still hitting all the requirements, that everything is still safe, and we can guarantee that everyone's going to be safe when they're on the ride. That's the biggest one, for sure. But then there's sometimes in those plans where I can look at something and go like, oh, this is really great. I'm not going to name the ride for this particular instance, but I was handed designs for a particular ride that we were going to get installed, and I looked at it and it went over the top. It was a launch ride. It went over the top. I was like, oh, that's great. And I looked at the plans really carefully. I said, hey, where's the ladder that goes to the top? And they said, what ladder? I'm like, the ladder that goes to the top. That way, when the train gets stuck up there, we can go up and move it one way or the other, or offload people, or do whatever we need to do. And they say that's like a 1 in a billion chance that'll happen. And I actually got pretty vocal about that one. I'm like, hey, here's YouTube. Go ahead and just Google like any launch ride you want to. Go ahead and Google it and YouTube it, and you'll pretty much find every single one of them stuck at the top. It happens. It happens a lot. And they said, oh, no, that's not going to happen. So sometimes we have some say in what happens. Other times we make good suggestions and they go unheard. Maybe they're executed in hindsight. Good idea. Wish we would have had it sooner. Anyways, sorry. Kind of spun off there. Number 4 is the intamin trauma, as I like to call it, real thing, and why do intamins go down a lot? Intamin makes a very nice product. They're right up there with B&M. Unfortunately, in my opinion, they don't support their product well. And there's two sides to this coin, and they're both very aggressive, nasty sides. So the first side is from the park. Like if I've got an Intamin ride and I say, well, it's got this big metal pivot pin on the inside, and I take the ride apart and we're rehabbing it, and that pin gets dropped, damaged accidentally, right? Something happens, the pin gets damaged, and it's like, it's a safety feature. It's like we can't reuse the pin at that point in time. I pick up the phone and I call and I'm like, I need another one of those pins like right now. And unfortunately, the response from them most of the time is, oh man, that's like 19 weeks out. We don't have 19 weeks. So we're literally calling up other parks in the system, other parks outside of the system. Anyone that's got an Intamin ride like yours, like call that park up and find out if they have one of these pins, if they're willing to sell you one, if they're willing to loan you one, if you're willing to replace one, whatever it may be, while the other one's coming from the manufacturer. So that's the first side. And that's like, oh man, that sucks, trying to get parts that they don't have. The second part to that is from the manufacturer side. When they supplied the ride, they said, here is a list of a lot of parts that you need to keep on the shelf to keep your ride running. So we flash back to that last instance, and I say I need that pin. Well, that pin was on that list. The park decided not to purchase that pin at the time. They decided not to keep it in inventory. So it's weird, because you could take that scenario and you could say, well, the manufacturer should supply that stuff and have it readily available. And the manufacturer can easily step back and say, hey, you guys need to stock that stuff to keep your trains up and running. So it's a cat's game. You kind of 50-50 either way. So that's one thing that a lot of people are used to, more of a jump through the hoop when it comes to parts and pieces for their rides. When I break something or something is damaged for some reason, I expect when I call that manufacturer that they've got engineering ready to go to support whatever I need done. And I also expect that they're going to have parts within reason sitting around ready to be used. But that's a pretty slippery slope in that category, and it's rough to talk about too, because it's a very complicated subject, and I can see it easily from both sides of the coin. And to sit here and say, well, they don't support their stuff, and they're not good with parts, and they're not this and they're not that, that really boils down to like slander. And it's like, I don't want to slander anybody on this channel. I'm not here to do that. They try as hard as they can to do things. They rely on other people to do stuff for them, Like when they say, hey, you guys need to buy all those parts, then the park needs to buy all those parts. Parks a lot of times try to get away cheap, and they're like, well, that's $2.5 million worth of parts. We don't want to stock $2.5 million worth of parts, so we're not going to. And that's where the conflict comes into a lot. The other part of that question was, why do they break down so much? Intamin, in particular, is one of the pioneers of all these technologies that really push the industry forward. They were the first ones that I know of, let me caveat that one. They were the first ones to come out with the linear inductive launch on a roller coaster, the synchronous launch too. Remember, that's like the first synchronous launch out there. If I have my facts right, it's Superman the Escape down in Magic Mountain. 0 to 100 miles an hour. It's amazing. I've been told it's actually 0 to 89 on a good day with the Hall effect sensors aligned properly and all that stuff. But when you push the boundary, when you push the envelope as hard as you can, you're going to run into problems. And they don't have time to do years and years and years of testing to make sure the product is perfect. They put it together, they make sure it's safe, and they make sure it's as dependable as they can make it for what they can figure out. And then a lot of times they come up and there's stuff that comes up that's unforeseen. It's like, hey, we didn't think that would happen. So yeah, like I said, when you push the envelope and you push technology, it's bound to not work. That's one of the reasons, like I believe it's the Navy, they just built an aircraft carrier a while back with linear synchronous catapults on them to launch aircraft. Well, when you're launching off a $30 million aircraft every time with 2 people on it, if that aircraft doesn't launch properly, it's not just a fault. It's not a rollback, We didn't just roll back and we're back in it and we'll do it again. You've lost that $30 million fighter jet. You possibly have lost those pilots in it as well. So the government didn't really want to stand behind that technology yet, because they're basically, it was what happens if it fails. And as opposed to the older ships, they had steam catapults. And it's like, they're old, but they work. And they work consistently every time. We know how to work them, we know how to fix them, everything. So it's that same thing. You want a different analogy? It's like, how many times have you broken something inside of your car? In the suspension, in the engine? It's a pretty rare thing, right? You have a sensor go out occasionally, but not really. But when you get into race cars, those things break constantly. Well, you're pushing the equipment to the edge. You're going to its maximum RPM, its maximum torque. So you're going to break things down quicker. Pretty much any new technology out there, it's going to have problems. I don't care which manufacturer makes it, but it's going to mess up. It's going to have problems. It's going to have downtime. The difference between the good manufacturers and the bad manufacturers is the good ones can recover from that and keep going. The bad ones, it might be the last nail in the coffin for them and shut the entire company down over one mistake. Sometimes just hopes and prayers, and they just don't go the way it wanted to. I mean, look at the X2 down at Magic Mountain. There's another one. That's an amazing contraption right there. But it just didn't go the way the manufacturer wanted it to go. And the industry didn't bite onto it either. The orders never came in. And it turned out to be more of a nightmare than anything else to work on. But still one of the most amazing coasters out there. I mean, only, I think, 2 in the world, and you can't really get more of a different experience than that. So that's something else. But yeah, so intamin rides break down a lot because they're mostly prototypes. And like I said, they get that technology working just enough to get it out there, moving people through it. And that technology it's going to develop and be better. But that first one, that prototype that comes out, it's going to be rough. Very rough. Anyways, I went on way too long. Like and subscribe if you want more. Ryan the Ride Mechanic. Take care.